Funding for this edition of Remember Them with Steve Adubato and Jacqui Tricarico has been provided by PSE&G, committed to providing safe, reliable energy now and in the future. NJM Insurance Group, serving New Jersey's drivers, homeowners, and business owners for more than 100 years. RWJ Barnabas Health, the New Jersey Education Association. Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, here when you need us most, now and always. Prudential Financial. New Jersey Institute of Technology, NJIT, makes industry-ready professionals in all STEM fields. And by the Russell Berry Foundation, making a difference. Promotional support provided by New Jersey Globe. And by New Jersey Monthly, the magazine of the Garden State, available at newsstands.
Welcome to Remember Them. Steve Adubato with my colleague, my co-anchor, and the executive producer, Remember Them, Jacqui Tricarico. Jacqui, people are going to wonder, hey, why are you looking at two mobsters who were infamous, iconic mobsters, broke the law, on this Remember Them? We have Longie Zwillman, and we also have Richie the Boot Boyardo. What's up with that? You see the book over here that's written by Scott Deitche, which is Garden State Gangland, and also the other book Richard Lynette wrote, Richie the Boot Boyardo. What are we doing, Jacqui?
Well, it's just another instance when these people had a significant impact on New Jersey. You know, we don't need to so much say we're honoring them, right? But they had a significant impact in New Jersey. And Longie Zwillman and Richie the Boo also had a lot of connections to one another, both kind of fighting to become the top mom bosses in New Jersey. And Richie and Longie Zwillman came from born in Newark, right, Steve? I know you know a little bit more about his upbringing and him trying to be the Al Capone of New Jersey.
I was not around then, so don't go there. It was way before I was born. But Longie Zwillman, born and raised in Newark in a certain section where there was a large Jewish community. I believe it's the same community that Philip Roth, trust me, that's not about the mob. That's being one of the greatest writers of all time. Philip Roth from a certain section of Newark. Richie the Boot Boyardo from, I hate to say this, but I will, my neighborhood in Newark. I heard about him as a kid. He was gone. He had died, but I heard about him an awful lot. But what's fascinating is that Richie the Boot Boyardo, tied to mob families in New York, the five mob families that Lucky Luciano had put together, he was part of that. But Longie Zwillman, a brilliant businessman involved in bootlegging and a whole range of activities, mostly illegal, but some legitimate, but could never be in the mafia. Jacqui, why?
Because of his Jewish descent. It's different. It's different. Yep, it's different. And they butted heads a lot, and there was a lot of controversy between the two of them. And even when Richie the Boo had gotten shot multiple times, at first they were blaming Zwillman, but it wasn't him. So yeah, a long history between the two of them there. And it's really interesting. On the back end of our show, we're going to look at a pre-taped interview that you did in 2013, like you said, with Richard Lynette, who wrote the book in the Godfather Garden, The Lone Life and Times of Richie the Boot Boyardo, but also along with Roger Hanos, who is the grandson of Richie the Boot. He contributed to this book because he learned so much more about his grandfather after his passing. You know, he lived on the same area, the same plot of land where his grandfather lived, but things were so hush-hush. And he even tells you in the interview, it really was shocking to him, so many things that he learned about his grandfather.
You're reminding me of, I've been at this too long. Some interviews I even forget. For Jacqui, myself, and the entire terrific team at Remember Them, Richie the Boot Boyardo and Longie Zwillman, folks who knew them well and wrote about them. Thanks, Jacqui. Here he is, Scott Deitche. He knows an awful lot about the mob in New Jersey. He's the author of Garden State Gangland, The Rise of the Mob in New Jersey. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You got it. Hey, listen, remember them. That's the series. Why should we remember Abner Longie Zwillman?
He was a Newark native and was probably one of the more influential organized crime figures, certainly through the Prohibition, post-Prohibition era. And a lot of people, even people in New Jersey, aren't necessarily really familiar. He's not as much of a household name as Al Capone or John Gotti.
It's funny. There's, for those of us who are aficionados of The Godfather, we know the character Hyman Roth, modeled after Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky, one of the most famous Jewish mobster in the country. Longie, in many ways, just as significant, just not well known, but by design.
Yeah, he grew up in the Jewish section of Newark. He was headquartered out of the Riviera Hotel, which is still there. He was friends with Meyer Lansky and was very much a defendant or stood up against people that were going against the Jewish community at that time. So he had a little bit of a folk hero status, but he really kind of tried to keep out of the public eye, especially during Prohibition, when he really started to expand in his illegal empire.
Did Longie do business with Joe Kennedy, the father of President John F. Kennedy, who was very much involved in the liquor business?
So there was a story that a shipment of liquor that Joe Kennedy was invested in went missing, and Joe blamed Longie Zwillman for it. Zwillman denied it, but Zwillman believed that later on, that's why, especially in the 1950s, the federal authorities really started coming down hard on him as kind of revenge for this missing liquor shipment of Joe Kennedy's. There's some truth to that. Maybe there's some story to it, but there's a definite tie there.
So Longie and the mob, the mafia, if you will, La Cosa Nostra, Longie could not obviously be part of that officially because he was not Italian, not from Sicily in particular, but he had great influence with people like Lucky Luciano, correct?
Yeah, Lucky Luciano, and then even more in New Jersey, people like Richie the Boot, Boiardo, Jerry Katina, primarily, Genovese crime family. So yeah, he had a lot of very close contacts to a lot of very important people in the underworld.
Longie Zwillman, if you will, excuse me. And by the way, Mark Stewart, one of the first interviews I did as a broadcaster, Mark Stewart, you know his book, Gangster Number Two?
Yeah, yep, I read it. Yeah.
One of the first interviews I did was with Mark. I've been fascinated by Zwillman for years. I grew up in Newark, used to hear about him as a kid. He was long gone. P.S. Zwillman was found, he hung himself, correct?
Correct, yeah. He hung himself in the basement of his house.
Excuse me?
In the basement of his house, yeah.
Was he not supposed to testify before the Kefauver Commission? Senator Kefauver had a commission investigating organized crime. He was supposed to testify. He wasn't going to talk, and he killed himself.
Well, there's a little bit of a time difference between when he killed himself and during the Kefauver Commission, but yeah, there's a lot of suspicion on his suicide, but people I've spoken to and people that knew Zwillman said that he most likely did commit suicide. He was coming under a lot of intense pressure by federal authorities, and people said he was depressed in the weeks leading up to his suicide. There were a lot of pressure on him, so I think it leans towards suicide.
P.S. The name Longie, Jacqui and I talked about it earlier. He was very tall. In fact, I think he was called the Tall One, so he was Longie.
Yeah, that's how he got his nickname, yeah.
And you know what's fascinating to me, Scott, is that he did not want notoriety. He was very much unlike John Gotti and some other people in the mob. He wanted to be in the background. He was a successful, smart business person. He was not a fan, or am I romanticizing this, not a fan of violence, but knew violence was at times necessary?
Yeah, and in fact, I would say he modeled himself more as a businessman. Certainly in the post-Prohibition era, you see him just investing tremendously into a wide array of legitimate businesses and really kind of looking towards a more legitimate, going legit, if you will. So I think your characterization there is accurate for sure.
You know, we're going to show a picture of Jean Harlow, right? A starlet, if you will, in Hollywood at the time. Longy had a relationship with her.
Yeah, Longy had a relationship with Jean Harlow. He spent some time out in Hollywood. He had some investments out there, investments in Las Vegas at that time. So, but even then, even though he was tied to, one of the biggest actresses of the time, he still kind of stayed a little bit more in the shadows than like a Johnny Stompanato, Lana Turner kind of relationship.
Yeah, before I let you go, Longie Zwillman, one of the many mobsters that you feature in Garden State Gangland. What the heck is it, in your view, Scott, that makes New Jersey, that has made New Jersey historically such a comfortable place for so many mobsters?
Well, you have 7 crime families operated within New Jersey, the 5 New York families, the Philly family, the DeCalvacanti homegrown Elizabeth family. You had Sicilian communities in Elizabeth and Newark in the early 1900s, which spawned some of these affiliations. And there was definitely a level of political corruption in New Jersey, which allowed them to operate pretty freely.
So finally, for those of you who are wondering, hey, why would Jacqui, why would Steve on Remember Them remember people who were mobsters connected to the state of New Jersey? They mattered. We do not glorify, we do not condone, but our job is to examine history and historical figures who matter, and Longie Zwillman was one of them. Scott Deitche, who is the author of Garden State Gangland, The Rise of the Mob in New Jersey, cannot thank you enough for joining us on Remember Them.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
To see more Remember Them programs, visit us online at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato, PhD, and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
Big Flamingo Insurance, what do you want?
Yeah, can we get the auto insurance policy?
Anything else?
Can we add an extra driver?
Number form combo, your premium comes with pickup spot 2.
Okay.
When it comes to insurance, you don't have to sacrifice service to save.
Wait, this isn't even the right policy.
Upgrade to NJM and get the 5-star customer service you deserve with discounts you'll love.
Excuse me, Mr. Rollerbird?
No jingles or mascots, just great insurance. NJM. Get a quote today.
PSE&G is building the utility of the future. A future where people use less energy, and it's cleaner, safer, and delivered more reliably than ever. We are modernizing to lower emissions, support more renewables and electric vehicles, and reduce outages. And we are empowering our customers. At PSE&G, we are powering progress.
We have a 1-on-2 here. Richard Lynette is the author of In the Godfather Garden, the long life and times of Richie the Boot Boyardo, and Roger Janos is grandson of Richie the Boot Boyardo. Good to have both of you here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Set this up for us. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in the North Ward of Newark, New Jersey, hearing about Richie Boyardo my entire life. Became the inspiration for Tony Soprano's character in the HBO hit series The Sopranos, fair to say?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lots of similarities there. And you grew up as a kid in the area, right?
Our family's from Vailsburg.
Yeah.
And then we moved out and went up to Roseland, which is right in the shadow of the estate of Richie the Boot.
Now, how do you come into this whole thing, right? And how do you meet this guy?
Well, believe it or not, my mother calls from Florida. She's retired and says, hey, I heard there's an article in Penthouse magazine regarding Grandpa and Uncle Tony. And I said...
Uncle Tony would be Tony Boy.
Right.
Tony Boy, Richie Boyardo's son, who was also involved in that life. Go ahead.
Correct. So I read the article. I thought it was a great job. I contacted Rich Lynette and invited him over, proposed that we do a book together. And so we came to terms and collaborated on an agreement, and which resulted in the book. Rich was a great choice in terms of doing this because he was an established author, writer, and a journalist, and plus he had the same passion and determination as I did to tackle the project.
What's interesting, for those, some might assume that family members of organized crime figures would, whether you sign the vow of omerta or understand the vow of omerta, would say, well, it's a vow of secrecy that we would never, or is that just old and irrelevant and...
Well, it changed over the years. A lot of people, you know, Gotti's lieutenant, you know,
Sammy the Bull?
Sammy the Bull started talking. All these guys talk in the end. I mean, a lot of them talk
Yes.
in the end. But Roger was never in this life of theirs. He was never in it. In fact, the Boot made sure that his grandchildren were not in this life. His son was the heir apparent, and that was Tony Boy, and he got in it. And that often happened. It happened, of course, with the Corleone family and the Godfather.
Yes.
And there are parallels.
Even though they wanted Michael to go to a different way?
Exactly.
Senator Corleone, Governor Corleone, it didn't happen that way.
Didn't happen that way. But Roger did go a different way. But he happened to live on the estate that that the Boot built in Livingston.
Yeah, talk about the estate. Some interesting things happened there.
It's about 30 acres up on a hill by Rikers Hill, right next to a Nike base, big mansion, lots of statues. It was profiled in a Life magazine article in 1967.
What are we looking at right there, by the way? That's a picture of?
That's Richie the Boot on his horse, a statue that's in the garden.
Yes.
In the garden. That's why it's in the Godfather garden. That's the house, the main house. Can I play
Talk
off
about
the
it.
images?
Yeah.
That picture was what, from 1950?
1950.
Yeah, 1950. Right. So it was in great shape. Now it's fallen into disrepair. The property had like a little village with all of the houses where the children lived. His daughters lived, and Roger grew up there. So Roger grew up on the estate. He was the perfect person for me to get in touch with because, you know, some of the cousins had disappeared when other places. Roger grew up on the estate. He tended to Richie the Boot through the second half of his life, basically, and saw him on his deathbed.
You did?
Yes. Yes,
Let me
I
ask
did.
you about this. It's interesting to me. You knew him obviously in a very different way than those of us who heard about him, who heard about the violence, who heard about the extortion, who heard about the mob connections that had politicians in his back pocket, like they used to talk about in The Godfather, about Vito Corleone, but also heard about what would go on at that estate, that some of the mob figures would say that you would not want to be brought into certain places in the back in the estate because you would not come out and you wouldn't be killed in a kind way. You would be incinerated, you would be burned. That's the same man that you cared for in the second half of his life.
Yes.
Did you ever talk about those things?
No, no. My grandfather's life before, during, and after Prohibition remained a mystery to the immediate family.
Did you want to know?
Well, after I retired and finished my career, established my family, and yes, I had a major Ancestry.com moment. And Richard came along, and I took advantage of that.
So let me ask you this, because also the church that my sons actually wind up receiving their first Holy Communion in St. Lucy's Church, in the old First Ward of Newark, there is a stained glass window that I look up on. Actually, as we do this program this Sunday, as my son receives his first Holy Communion, Christopher, I'll be looking up on it. And the name there is Richard Boiardo. He was one of the biggest contributors, one of the biggest supporters of the church that sustained an Italian community where immigrants were poor, had nothing. He was, in many ways, the backbone of that church.
Absolutely right. We've always known him to be very charitable with churches, and especially St. Lucy's.
Is that a contradiction to be this person who was involved in murder, extortion, and everything he was doing, but still be a part of the church, tied to what they were doing, and trying to help poor people?
Absolutely. For whatever reasons, he was able to compartmentalize his secret life and his family life and the community life. And I don't know how he was able to do that without spilling over in each of the areas.
But he did.
Yeah.
Vittorio Castle was what your father owned. He owned it. He actually sold it to someone who I wound up knowing, Tom Panullo. It's so interesting, Tom's restaurant. But Vittorio Castle was a place that Joe DiMaggio would come from New York to want to be comfortable with friends. He owned it. It was a place to be, no?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you're referring to Victoria Castle prior to the Sorrento. Tom Punillo took over the
Yes,
Sorrento
yes.
restaurant. Yeah.
Describe Vittorio Castle. What was it, and how grand was it?
Well, from what I heard and saw, it was grand to the extent where everyone wanted to be married there, have their events there. The food was fantastic. It was also a place where you could rub shoulders with the gangsters, with a load of celebrities.
Celebrities had discovered Newark at that time. North Newark became like a mecca for people who were, you know, been in New York, been in Manhattan, been all those places. They discovered the North Ward of Newark, Italian neighborhood, great restaurants. That place was where Laurel and Hardy went, where Joe DiMaggio, a lot of celebrities
Sinatra knew
went.
it as well.
Yeah, Sinatra was there.
But the other side of this is that Richie Boiardo and Gerard Cattina and Jip DiCarlo and others who were part of that milieu also knew that one of the keys was to control the political figures in the city of Newark. And one of those political figures was you, Adanizio, who was the mayor of the city of Newark, who was convicted, went to jail. They owned him. They controlled him. They owned the city. Describe the connection between Richie Boiardo, those guys, and the politicians in the city.
Well, there was that was Tony Boy's initiative, the Newark.
Tony Boy Boiardo.
Tony Boy Boiardo. At that point, Richie was kind of like, he retired in '58, supposedly, and gave the street activity to his son. His son got involved with the people who basically started doing sweetheart deals through a company called Valentine Electric, which he was associated with, and started, winning these bids.
Rigging these bids.
Rigging these bids, right.
But hold on, was the key that Tony Boiardo learned from his father was that you had to control political figures in order to move commerce, meaning Richie Boiardo was involved in moving liquor illegally during Prohibition, and as was Joe Kennedy and others, no secret. Watch Boardwalk Empire. Point being, Tony Boy learned from his father and others around him that you had to control political figures in order to move commerce. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely fair assessment, yes.
So talk about what happened.
So it's interesting when you bring that up with Richie, because Richie had the Modern Political Association, which was basically a club that was a hangout for his gang, and it also was a way to get money to support the candidates that he was behind, including Paul Moore, who was a congressman, Jersey congressman, who showed up at this big 3-day party that celebrated the truce between Richie and the other gangster in New York, Abe Longie Zwillman. So during that 3-day event, politicians showed up, cops showed up, judges showed up, and some of them lost elections after they were photographed, including Paul Moore. And Richie figured that out early, and he passed his knowledge on to his son. And his son brought it to this high level where in 1969, when it was discovered that Adanizio and this whole ring of corruption had basically taken over the city.
Excuse me, which also included the director of the police department, Dominic Spina.
Exactly. They basically drained the public coffers of funds. And that was, especially the New York Times, which investigated, said that was one of the reasons why the riots had occurred in '67, because there's no safety net anymore, because gangsters were sucking the lifeblood out of the city. And the city of Newark burned, and 26 people died during that.
So in many ways, what happened in Newark in 1967, according to many, was the culmination of that corruption leading up to that.
Yeah, it was that and race issues because of the influx of Southern blacks into the city, which created and then diaspora of Italians and Germans out into the suburbs, like my family.
Absolutely, my family stayed. Yeah. But let me ask you this, and they're not going anywhere. but let me ask you this: as someone who grew up in that neighborhood, as someone who grew up hearing the stories, I want to ask you, because my last name ends in a vowel, yours happens not to, but you understand where I'm going with this. Do you understand some Italian Americans believing that Richie the Boot Boiardo and Tony Boy Boiardo and others who were involved in that life and the corruption, the crime, the murder, the extortion and everything, that beyond what people believe The Godfather and The Sopranos and all that is about, that they've made it hell on the rest of us?
Yes.
Do you get that?
Yes, I do get that. I'm also half Italian, and I grew up believing that my grandfather was the Robin Hood. took from the rich, gave to the poor. But after doing the research on the book, working with Richard, there's a lot more to it than that, a whole lot more to it. The amount of crime, corruption, the killings, shocking, absolutely
brutal
shocking.
killings.
And it's not just during the last 20 years of my grandfather's reign, but going back to the 20s and the 30s, it's just mayhem.
Has it been worse for you to know more? But the
Yes.
more you knew, more you
Yes.
have wound up knowing. Has it been worse for you emotionally and psychologically?
Yes, not only that, but in terms of the betrayal factor. I mean, I grew up with a unwritten code of silence. You know, don't ever talk about your grandfather, say anything bad. I mean, everyone that I spoke with praised my grandfather. Of course, I'm the grandson. I mean, it hurts to have to say this, but he chose a life, a secret life that that is not right. It's wrong. It was wrong.
It's interesting though, when he came, he comes over from Italy. There are hard times in the United States. A lot of people came over from Italy, and there's prohibition, and they see a way to start making money, and they get involved in that life.
No,
and
respectfully, my grandfather came in 1919.
Yeah.
He chose to be a barber and work in a factory. So when you say they, I just want to be clear.
Right. My grandfather too, on my mother's side, Moretti.
So
also
go ahead.
the same side. A Mason coming to Newark.
So go ahead.
And working totally legitimately.
Right. I just want to be clear because you seem to be going in a certain direction.
I'm not
like there was no other way.
Yeah. No, there is another way.
There was,
one of the reasons why everybody's attracted to these stories is these guys consider themselves soldiers, like the guys going to Afghanistan. They put themselves in that mind frame. This is a world in which we get things done. We don't have laws. We have some laws. We don't have judges. We don't have lawyers. We get things done either by sitting down or whacking the other guy.
For the baker, and for the butcher, and for the shoemaker, if they didn't pay these guys, they had problems with the same people who would bust their windows and tear down their businesses.
Yeah.
So what are you talking about?
I'm not justifying it.
But
I'm
you
just
make
saying,
it sound like somehow they were protecting them against someone else. They were protecting them against themselves because they were the ones who were going. If you didn't pay, if you didn't pay these guys came after you.
Right. No, and they're all bullies. I mean, I know myself. I'm just saying the attraction of this life, the attraction to this life.
The perception of the life versus the reality of it.
Right.
Could we acknowledge they're two different things?
Yeah.
Got The Sopranos, The Godfather. I watched every one of those movies, know way too many of the lines than I would like to admit. But the reality of the life is not the same as the Hollywood version.
Absolutely.
Remember Them with Steve Adubato and Jacqui Tricarico has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by PSC&G, NJM Insurance Group, RWJ Barnabas Health, the New Jersey Education Association, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, Prudential Financial, New Jersey Institute of Technology, and by the Russell Berry Foundation. Promotional support provided by New Jersey Globe and by New Jersey Monthly. To see more Remember Them programs, visit us online at steveadubato.org. If you would like to express an opinion, email us at info@caucusnj.org. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Steve Adubato PhD and follow us on Twitter at Steve Adubato.
With NJM, drivers could save up to 25% on their auto insurance.
Hey guys, just wondering if you've changed your mind on the whole no mascot thing. You know, because if you are interested, you should really say something because I got a few gigs in the works. So, I might not be available. Hello, and hey,
Some insurance companies are known for their mascots.
Oh, hi, Carl. Hey.
NJM is known for what matters.
Thank you.
Outstanding service you can count on.
Where'd you even get this? I know a guy.
No jingles or mascots, just great insurance. NJM. Get a quote today.
Every day, nearly 2 million customers across New Jersey rely on PSC&G to provide natural gas. And every day, PSC&G is committed to doing it safely. That includes making sure you know what to do if you smell gas. A natural gas leak smells like rotten eggs. If you suspect a gas leak, leave your home immediately. Get far away, then call 911. Remember, smell, leave, call. Protect the ones you love. Learn more at pscg.com/gas safety.